Hello and welcome to the Sleepy Historian. Settle in, find a comfortable position, and let the sounds of the world outside fade away. Tonight, we are not traveling across dusty continents or sailing vast oceans. Instead, we are journeying inward, into the heart and mind of a man who lived 5 centuries ago in a city built on a lake, under a sky filled with gods and portents. Did you know that, for the Aztec civilization, the world was not a series of random events, but a sacred text, constantly being written by the gods? Every strange cloud, every unusual animal cry, every stumble in the street could be a message, a warning of what was to come. Now imagine you are a prince, your life laid out before you, a path of duty and honor. Your wedding is arranged, a union that will secure alliances and bring stability to the empire. It should be a time of celebration. But what if the world itself seems to be screaming for you to stop? What if the omens, one after another, point toward disaster? Tonight, we explore the story of one such prince and the crushing weight of anxiety in an age of prophecy. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into the past, please consider subscribing. It helps our small channel continue to tell these stories. For now, though, just breathe and let us begin. Our story opens in the heart of the Mexican Empire, the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, a jewel of canals and pyramids rising from the shimmering waters of Lake Texcoco. Here lived a young prince named Ixtli. He was not the heir to the throne, but a nephew to the great Tenochtitlan, the emperor himself. Ixtli was known throughout the city for his courage in the Flower Wars, his skill with the macuahuitl, and his steady, thoughtful demeanor. His life was one of privilege, but also of immense responsibility. And now he faced his greatest duty yet, marriage. His bride was to be Citlali, the daughter of a powerful lord from the allied city-state of Tlacopan. The union was a strategic masterpiece, a thread that would weave two powerful families together, strengthening the triple alliance that ruled the valley. Ixtli had met her only a few times, but he knew she was respected, intelligent, and carried herself with the grace of a future leader. He felt not love, perhaps, but a deep and abiding respect and a sense of rightness. The wedding preparations filled the palace with a vibrant energy. Artisans were crafting intricate featherwork cloaks, jewelers were setting jade and turquoise into golden pendants, and the city's markets buzzed with the trade of exotic goods for the grand feast. Ixtli felt the excitement in his own heart, a quiet hum of anticipation for the new chapter of his life. He was doing his duty. He was serving his people. All was as it should be. One afternoon, as Ixtli walked through the palace gardens, a flash of iridescent green caught his eye. A quetzal, a bird sacred for its magnificent tail feathers, had landed on a nearby branch. But it was not its beauty that held him captive. The bird let out a strange, choked cry, a sound unlike any he had ever heard. It was a discordant note in the symphony of the garden. The bird then took flight, but instead of soaring gracefully towards the sky, it flew erratically, dipping and weaving as if drunk, before disappearing over the palace walls. Ixtli stood frozen for a long moment. It was unusual. A small, cold stone seemed to settle in his stomach. His training as a warrior had taught him to observe everything, to see patterns. This felt like a break in the pattern, a stitch dropped in the grand tapestry of the cosmos. He tried to dismiss it. It was just a bird, perhaps sick or startled. It meant nothing. But even as he told himself this, the image of its panicked flight and the memory of its strangled call lingered in his mind, a tiny, dark seed of unease planted in the fertile soil of his thoughts. He shook his head, forcing a smile, and continued his walk, but the garden suddenly seemed a little less bright, the air a little heavier than before. Days later, Ixtli was summoned to the grand chambers of his uncle, the Tlacopan. The emperor, a man whose presence filled any room, sat upon a carved throne, flanked by advisors. He spoke of the importance of Ixtli's wedding, not with pressure, but with pride. Everything must be auspicious, the Tlacopan declared, his voice calm but firm. The date and time of the ceremony must be chosen with the utmost care. We will consult the finest tonal pauqui in the city. A tonal pauqui was a calendar priest, a reader of the sacred 260-day calendar, the tonal pohuali. These men were the keepers of fate, their lives dedicated to interpreting the complex interplay of days, numbers, and deities that governed all of existence. The chosen priest arrived the next day, an old man with eyes that seemed to see through stone and into time itself. He unrolled his deerskin codex, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and vibrant paintings of the gods. He burned copal incense, its fragrant smoke curling towards the heavens, and chanted softly, casting kernels of maize onto a black cloth. Ixtli watched, his heart beating a steady rhythm against his ribs. After a long silence, the priest looked up. "The signs are favorable," he announced. "The day he has chosen falls under the sign of Kali, the house. It is a good day for family, for foundations, for building a lineage." A wave of relief washed over Ixtli, but the priest had not finished. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the prince. "However," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "the day is ruled by the Lord of the Night, Tepyalatl, the heart of the mountain. He is the jaguar god, a being of echoes, secrets, and the earth's hidden power. It is a strong sign, but one that demands caution. The jaguar walks in shadow. Be mindful of what you cannot see." The warning, veiled and subtle, did little to calm the seed of unease that had taken root in Ixtli's soul. A favorable day, shadowed by a warning. It was another discordant note. That night, Ixtli's sleep was not restful. He dreamt he was standing in a vast, dark space, the air thick with the scent of copal and blood. Before him stood a figure, but it was indistinct, cloaked in shadow and smoke. In one hand, the figure held a polished obsidian mirror. Ixtli knew, with a certainty that only dreams can provide, that this was Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, the trickster god of fate, change, and discord. The god lifted the mirror, and Ixtli saw not his own reflection, but a swirling vortex of smoke. From the smoke, images began to form and then dissolve. A crumbling pyramid, a broken jade necklace, a single feather floating on dark water. He felt a profound sense of dread, a cold terror that seeped into his very bones. He tried to call out, to ask what it meant, but his voice was gone, stolen by the oppressive silence of the dream. Tezcatlipoca lowered the mirror, and for a moment the shadows shifted, revealing a cruel, knowing smile. Then the guard turned and walked away, his footsteps making no sound, leaving Ixtli alone in the suffocating darkness. He awoke with a gasp, his heart pounding in his chest, the sheets of his sleeping mat damp with sweat. The dream clung to him like a shroud, its sinister imagery burned into his mind. It was more than a simple nightmare. It felt like a visitation, a direct message from a god who reveled in chaos. The anxiety that had been a small stone in his gut now began to grow, sending out cold tendrils of fear. In the weeks that followed, Ixtli tried to immerse himself in the duties of a prince, hoping that routine and responsibility would banish the shadows from his mind. He accompanied his aunt to the great market of Tlayatlalco, a sprawling city of commerce that amazed even those who saw it every day. The air was a cacophony of sounds and smells, the chatter of thousands of voices in dozens of languages, the scent of fresh flowers, roasting maize, and pungent spices. He was tasked with overseeing the purchase of ceremonial cacao, the bitter, frothy drink of nobles and guards. As he was inspecting a beautifully painted ceramic pot filled with precious beans, a clumsy merchant jostled him. Ixtli stumbled, his hand slipping. The pot fell from his grasp and shattered on the stone plaza, scattering the dark beans like spilled blood. A collective gasp went through the nearby crowd. All activity around them ceased. In the sudden, ringing silence, all eyes were on Ixtli and the broken pottery at his feet. It was an accident, a simple, clumsy moment. But in a world where every event was a potential sign, it was much more. He could hear the whispers ripple through the crowd. A bad sign. The pot of cacao for the wedding. The guards are displeased. Ixtli's face burned with shame and a fresh wave of fear. He paid the merchant for the loss, his hands trembling slightly, and quickly left the market, the whispers following him like ghosts. The world, it seemed, was conspiring to confirm his deepest anxieties. Every slip, every accident, was no longer just a part of life. It was a verdict from the heavens. Seeking refuge in the familiar, Ixtli went to the training grounds, the place where he had always felt most at home, most in control. Here the world was simple. There was the weight of the shield, the feel of the macuahuitl in his hand, the dance of combat. He hoped the physical exertion, the focus required for mock battle, would cleanse his mind. He sparred with his closest friend, a seasoned warrior named Kyortli. They moved in a blur of motion, their obsidian-edged wooden swords clashing with sharp, percussive cracks. But Ixtli's mind was not on the fight. He saw the swirling smoke from his dream, heard the whispers from the market. His movements were a fraction too slow, his instincts dulled by the fog of worry. Kyortli, sensing his friend's distraction, pressed his attack. He feinted left, then swung his macuahuitl in a wide, powerful arc from the right. It was a move Ixtli had countered 1,000 times, but today he was late. He brought his shield up just in time, but the obsidian blades bit deep into the wood, splintering it and sending a jarring shock up his arm. The blow knocked him off balance, and he staggered back, his heart hammering. A few inches higher, and it would have taken his head. Kyortli lowered his weapon, his face etched with concern. "Ixtli, your head is in the clouds. What troubles you?" Ixtli couldn't answer. He just stared at his shattered shield, a potent symbol of his own fractured focus. The one place he had felt safe, the one skill he had trusted above all others, had now betrayed him. His anxiety was no longer just a feeling. It was a physical danger, a weakness that could cost him his life. That evening, a formal meeting was arranged with his betrothed, Citlali, and her family. They met in a hall adorned with flowers, the air sweet with their perfume. Citlali was, as he remembered, poised and intelligent. She spoke of the administration of her father's lands, of trade and tribute, with a knowledge that impressed everyone present. She was strong, a true partner for a prince. But as Ixtli looked at her, he felt a chasm opening between them. He should have been engaging her, sharing his own thoughts, building the foundation of their future. Instead, he was a silent observer, trapped behind a wall of his own fear. His mind kept replaying the omens. The bird, the priest's warning, the dream, the broken pot, the shattered shield. He saw not a beautiful, capable woman before him, but another piece of a future that felt cursed. When she turned to him and asked a question about the upcoming ceremonies, his response was hesitant, his words hollow. He could see a flicker of confusion, perhaps even disappointment, in her eyes. She had been promised a great warrior, a confident prince. The man she saw before her was a ghost, his spirit already defeated by shadows. The meeting concluded with polite formalities, but the connection he had hoped to forge felt impossibly distant. He was not just failing the gods, he was failing her, and the two great families their union was meant to honor. As if the universe sought to punctuate his despair, the sky itself seemed to turn against him. Though it was the dry season, a time of clear skies and gentle sun, dark, bruised-looking clouds began to gather over the valley one afternoon. They swirled in unnatural formations, moving with a speed that was unsettling. The wind rose to a howl, whipping the waters of Lake Texcoco into a frenzy. Then the storm broke. It was a deluge of terrifying violence. Rain fell in solid sheets, turning the canals into raging torrents. But it was the lightning that struck fear into the hearts of the city's inhabitants. It was relentless, splitting the sky with blinding flashes of white and purple. A bolt of immense power struck the Templo Mayor, the twin-peaked pyramid at the sacred heart of the city. It hit the shrine dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war, the patron deity of the Mexica. The strike was so powerful it shattered a portion of the carved stonework and ignited the decorative hangings, sending a plume of black smoke into the storm-racked sky. This was no mere storm. This was a divine proclamation. An attack on the temple of their most important god was an omen of the highest magnitude, a sign of profound celestial anger. For Ixtli, watching the smoke rise from the sacred precinct, it was the final, terrible confirmation. The guards were not just displeased, they were enraged, and he felt with a crushing certainty that this rage was directed at him and at the wedding he was about to undertake. In the grim aftermath of the storm, a stillness fell over the palace, a quiet punctuated by the nervous whispers of the court. The damage to the temple was quickly repaired, but the damage to the city's morale was not so easily mended. That night, as Ixtli lay on his mat, sleep eluding him, he heard it, a low, mournful hooting sound echoing from the palace roof. He sat up, straining to listen. It came again, closer this time, an owl. To the Mexica, the owl was not a symbol of wisdom, but a creature of darkness and ill fortune. It was a messenger from Mictlan, the underworld, a harbinger of death. Its cry was said to precede tragedy. For an owl to perch on the roof of the royal palace, so soon after the storm that struck the temple, was an omen of almost unspeakable dread. Ixtli felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. He imagined the creature perched above him, its large, dark eyes seeing into the palace, into his very room, into his soul. It was as if the underworld itself was now taking an interest in his fate. The omens were no longer subtle or ambiguous. They were escalating, growing louder and more terrifying with each passing day. The bird's choked cry had been a whisper of warning. The owl's hoot was a shout of doom. He pulled his cloak tightly around him, but it offered no protection from the cold that was seeping into his heart. Ixtli could no longer hide his distress. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. He moved through the palace like a phantom, starting at sudden noises, his once steady hands now prone to trembling. The court noticed. He was a prince, a public figure, and his every mood was scrutinized. He began to overhear the whispers as he passed through the corridors. "Have you seen Prince Ixtli? He looks like he has seen a ghost. They say his wedding is cursed. The storm, the owl. It is all connected to him." The nobles, who had once greeted him with respect and admiration, now offered him hesitant smiles and averted their gaze. He was becoming an object of pity and fear, a man tainted by bad fortune. The social pressure was immense. He was not just a man struggling with his own private fears. He was a symbol, and his perceived weakness reflected on his entire family, on the Tlatni himself. Some of the more superstitious courtiers began to actively avoid him, as if his bad luck were a contagion they might catch. The isolation was a new kind of torment. He was surrounded by people, yet he had never felt more alone. His anxiety was no longer a secret burden. It was a public spectacle, a story being told in hushed tones in every corner of the court. Desperate for a moment of peace, for a place where the guards felt more benevolent, Ixtli took a canoe out to the Chinampas, the floating gardens that were a marvel of Mexica engineering. These man-made islands were lush with life, bursting with flowers, vegetables, and herbs. Here, amidst the gentle lapping of the water and the hum of insects, he hoped to find solace. He walked along the narrow pathways, breathing in the rich, earthy scent of the soil. For a time, it worked. The vibrant colors and the quiet productivity of the gardens soothed his frayed nerves. He felt a flicker of his old self returning. Then, as he rounded a patch of tall maize stalks, he saw it lying on the path ahead. A snake, but this was no ordinary snake. It had two heads, each one moving independently, its forked tongues tasting the air. The creature was a horrifying, unnatural sight. In Mexica cosmology, duality was a fundamental concept: day and night, life and death, creation and destruction. But this, a two-headed serpent, was a perversion of that natural order. It was a symbol of conflict, of internal strife, of a path that splits in two irreconcilable directions. The snake stared at him with its 4 unblinking eyes before slithering away into the undergrowth, a living embodiment of chaos. The peace Ixtli had found was shattered. Even here, in this place of life and growth, the omens had found him. There was no escape. The world was a prison of signs, and every wall was covered in warnings. Returning to the palace, his spirit lower than ever, Ixtli sought out the one person he felt he could still trust, his friend, Cuautli. He found the warrior polishing his weapons, his movements precise and economical. Ixtli finally unburdened himself, his voice low and strained as he recounted every omen, from the strange cry of the Quetzal to the 2-headed snake in the gardens. He spoke of his dream of Tezcatlipoca, of the whispers in the court, of the profound and suffocating anxiety that was crushing him. Cuautli listened patiently, his expression serious. When Ixtli finished, the warrior placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Ixtli," he said, his voice firm, "you are a warrior of the Mexica. We are the people of the sun. We do not bow to shadows and whispers." He tried to offer rational explanations. The bird was sick. The pot was an accident. The storm was just a storm, a rare one, but nothing more. A 2-headed snake is a deformity of nature, not a message from the gods. He spoke of courage, of the need to be strong for his family, for his bride. "Do not let these phantoms defeat you," he urged. "Your fear is a greater enemy than any omen." Ixtli listened, wanting to believe his friend's words. He appreciated the logic, the appeal to his warrior's pride, but it was not enough. Cuautli's world was one of clear-cut action, of enemies you could see and fight. Ixtli's enemies were intangible: fate, the anger of the gods, the poison of his own thoughts. The conversation, meant to comfort him, only deepened his sense of isolation. His friend, his brother in arms, could not understand the nature of the war being waged within his own mind. That evening, Ixtli found himself in his chambers, staring at his own reflection in a polished obsidian mirror, much like the one from his dream. The mirror, a tool for scrying and communicating with the divine, was a common possession for a man of his rank. But tonight, it felt like a dangerous portal. He looked into its dark, glassy surface, hoping to see the strong, confident prince he once was. At first, he saw only his own face, pale and haunted. But as he stared, the image began to waver, to distort. The edges of his reflection seemed to dissolve into smoke, just as they had in his dream. The face looking back at him was no longer his own. It was a twisted mask of fear, its mouth open in a silent scream. The room behind him in the reflection seemed to writhe and darken, the familiar patterns of the tapestries twisting into monstrous shapes. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if he were being pulled into the black depths of the mirror. He was face to face with Tezcatlipoca's influence, with the chaos the god represented. This was not a dream. This was real. He was seeing his own terror reflected back at him, magnified and made monstrous by the smoking mirror. With a cry of despair, he threw the mirror to the floor, where it shattered into 100 sharp, black fragments, each one reflecting a tiny, broken piece of his own terrified face. The act of violence brought no relief, only the grim finality of his own fragmentation. There was only one place left to turn. The next morning, before the sun had risen, Ixtli made his way to the Templo Mayor. The air was cool and still, the great pyramid a black silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. He climbed the steep stone steps, his legs aching, his heart heavy with a desperate plea. He went not to the shrine of Tlaloc, the rain god, but to the shrine of Huitzilopochtli, the one struck by lightning, the fierce patron of his people. He brought offerings, precious feathers, a small jade carving, and a pouch of his own blood, let from his earlobe in an act of personal sacrifice. He knelt before the imposing statue of the god, a fearsome figure adorned with hummingbird feathers and holding a serpent of fire. He lit the copal incense and watched the smoke rise, carrying his prayers to the heavens. He did not ask for the omens to stop. He did not ask for a sign of good fortune. He asked only for clarity, for the strength of a warrior to face what was to come, whatever it may be. "Great Huitzilopochtli, sun god, lord of the war," he whispered into the sacred silence, "my path is shrouded in darkness. My spirit is weak. Grant me the courage to walk the path you have set for me. Grant me the strength to honor my ancestors and my people. Show me how to be a warrior in the face of a fate I cannot see." He stayed there for a long time, kneeling on the cold stone, a lone figure pleading with his God, as the first rays of dawn began to illuminate the city below. As he descended the pyramid, his heart somewhat lighter for his prayers, a commotion was growing in the plaza below. People were gathering, their faces turned not towards the temple, but towards the sky. Ixtli followed their gaze. There in the still dark western sky hung a new star. It was not a star, he realized, but a celestial phenomenon, a point of light with a long, shimmering tail, like a plume of divine feathers. It was what his people called a Sitlal Popoka, a smoking star, a comet. Of all the omens the Mexica feared, this was among the most potent and terrifying. It was a tear in the fabric of the night, a cosmic sign of immense upheaval, often believed to herald the death of kings, the fall of empires, or the arrival of strange new gods. The crowd was silent, their upturned faces a mixture of awe and raw terror. For Ixtli, it was a blow more powerful than any weapon. He had just prayed for clarity, and this was the universe's answer. A blazing, undeniable omen of catastrophe hanging over the entire valley, visible to all. His personal anxieties were no longer personal. They were now reflected in the sky itself, magnified for all the world to see. The fear he had carried alone was now a shared terror. The wedding was not just his potential doom, it was now tied to the potential doom of his entire world. That evening, his uncle, the Tlatoni, summoned him once more. Ixtli entered the throne room expecting a reprimand, perhaps even a cancellation of the wedding to appease the terrified populace. But the emperor was not on his throne. He stood by a large window, looking out at the city, the faint light of the comet visible in the twilight sky. He spoke not as an emperor to a prince, but as an older man to a younger one. "I was your age when a great earthquake shook this city," the Tlatoni began, his voice soft and reflective. "The priests said it was a sign of the gods' anger. My own marriage was planned for the following month. I was terrified. I saw omens in every crack in the walls, in every bird that fell from the sky." He turned to face Ixtli, his eyes filled with a deep, weary wisdom. "Fate, my nephew, is a river. We can see the ripples on the surface, the omens, and they can fill us with fear of the currents below. But we cannot stop the river from flowing. We can only choose how we navigate it. Do we paddle with strength and courage, or do we let the current throw us against the rocks?" He placed a hand on Ixtli's shoulder. "The fear you feel is real. Do not deny it, but it is not a command. It is a challenge. The gods are not testing your future, they are testing your spirit here and now." In his uncle's words, Ixtli did not find a magical solution, but something far more valuable: empathy. He was not the first to feel this way. His fear was not a unique curse, but a part of the human condition, a burden even the greatest of leaders had to bear. Ixtli spent the next day in quiet contemplation. His uncle's words had shifted something within him. The fear had not vanished. The comet still hung in the sky. The memory of the omens was still sharp, but his relationship to them had changed. He had been fighting against fate, trying to decipher it, to outrun it, to appease it. He now saw the futility of that struggle. The future was unknowable. The omens could be interpreted in 100 different ways. Perhaps the two-headed snake did not mean chaos, but the joining of two great houses. Perhaps the lightning strike was not an attack, but a sign of Huitzilopochtli's raw power, a blessing of strength for the Union. He realized he had a choice. He could allow his anxiety to consume him, to make him a prisoner of what might be. This path would lead to the cancellation of the wedding, a political crisis, shame for his family, and a life ruled by fear. Or he could accept the uncertainty. He could choose to act with the courage his station demanded, not in defiance of the omens, but in spite of them. He could walk forward into the shadowed future, not knowing what it held, but knowing who he was. A prince of the Mexica, a warrior, a man of duty. It was not a choice to be happy or to be free of fear, but a choice to be brave. He sent a message to the Tlatoni and to the family of his bride. The wedding would proceed as planned. On the day of the wedding, the city was a paradox of celebration and apprehension. The comet was still faintly visible even in the daylight sky, a ghostly reminder of the uncertainty that hung over them all. Ixtli stood robed in a magnificent Tilmatli cloak of white feathers, adorned with jade and gold. He felt the familiar cold grip of anxiety in his stomach, a low hum beneath the surface of the ceremonial music. As his bride, Citlali, was carried towards him on a litter, her face serene and beautiful, he looked at her and saw not a component of accursed fate, but a partner in an unknown journey. He saw the strength in her eyes and drew from it. The priest began the long, ancient rites, his chants filling the air. Ixtli's mind did not silence its fears. He still saw the flash of the falling pot, the glint of the obsidian mirror, the two-headed snake slithering in the garden. The omens were a part of him now, woven into the fabric of his story. But they no longer had power over him. He had accepted them. He had accepted the fundamental truth that his uncle had shared. The river of fate would flow, regardless of his fear. As the priest tied the corner of his cloak to hers, binding them together, Ixtli made a silent vow. He would not be a prince who cowered from shadows. He would be a man who walked into the darkness with his eyes open, ready to face whatever came next, for his city, for his family, and for the woman by his side. The future was a smoking mirror, its visions unclear. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face the reflection. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past. May your own dreams be peaceful, and your path, though uncertain, be met with courage. Until next time, sleep well.